All right. Good morning, everybody. My name is Lisa Hayes. Can y'all hear me? No? I'm the Director of Collections here at the Charleston Library Society. And this program has been more than a year in the making, and we are so happy to have you all here to celebrate the culmination of our efforts. It's been great to work at the Library Society during this time when we're making so much of our manuscript collection more accessible. One major way we are able to accomplish this is through grant funding. And last year, SC 250, the South Carolina American Revolution Sestercentennial Commission, awarded the Library Society funds to digitize and transcribe all of our Revolutionary War era manuscripts to make them available on our website. The hope was not only to make the collection more accessible, but also to uncover any untold or hidden narratives that may exist within these documents. This morning, I'd like to thank Brett Bennett of SC 250 and direct you to their website to learn more about the valuable programming they are doing around the state over the next several years. Their mission, SC 250's mission, is to celebrate and promote South Carolina's role in the American Revolution by engaging and inspiring South Carolinians and visitors through heritage tourism, rural economic impact initiatives, and educational programs such as ours today. I would also like to thank and acknowledge Jennifer Comer, our development specialist who writes our grants and is so good at helping us accomplish so much. So on stage today, we have three very special people. First, I want to thank and acknowledge our moderator this morning, Danielle Cox. She's our digital historian, and she's largely responsible for the so-called deliverables of the grant. She scanned over 900 documents, and then after our volunteers transcribed them, she arranged them in our digital library and created a guide to the collection. All of this is available on our website for free. Danny is a whiz at making complicated things seem easy. And as a special treat today, we have a few pieces from the collection out on display in the back. I hope you'll take a moment to look at those later. And also Dr. Watson brought examples of 3 wills of wives of men who were members of the Library Society during this time, so you can have a look at those too. Joining Danny on stage this morning, we have Dr. Larry Watson and Reverend Dr. Paul Wood. Dr. Larry Watson is Associate Professor in the Department of History at the University of South Carolina. He is also an Adjunct Professor of History at South Carolina State University and Department Chair for Social Science. His fields of research are colonial America, Civil War and Reconstruction, and 20th century America. So basically everything. Dr. Watson received his master's in history from South Carolina State University and his PhD in African American and United States history, as well as early American literature at his current residence, USC, in Columbia. Dr. Watson is an experienced speaker and panelist, producing presentations and essays throughout his professional career. 2 recent works include Impact of the American Revolution on Slave Manumissions in South Carolina from 2023 and The Women of Reconstruction from 2022. Additionally, he was a moderator for a discussion about a documentary entitled Meltdown in Dixie, which is about barbecue, ice cream, and the Confederate flag. Dr. Paul Wood, Jr. was born in Charleston and raised in Camden, where he graduated from Camden High School in 1973. He holds a Bachelor of Arts from Furman University, a Master of Divinity from Yale Divinity School, and a Doctor of Ministry from Candler School of Theology at Emory University. Paul is a retired United Methodist minister. He served churches throughout South Carolina from 1980 until 2017. And upon his retirement, Reverend Dr. Wood became a historian of the American Revolution in South Carolina. He specializes in South Carolinian Dicey Langston Springfield, who was a heroine of the American Revolution, and in Anne Pamela Cunningham, who was a defender of the Cunningham family and founder of the Mount Vernon Ladies Association. Additionally, Paul is writing a biography with the support of SC 250 of William Cunningham, known as Bloody Bill, who became the state's most prolific murderer during the American Revolution. So please join me in thanking Dr. Watson and Reverend Dr. Wood for helping us understand more about our state and its history by researching and writing about folks who may not have appeared in our textbooks. Thank you.
All right, so good morning, everyone. We're just going to jump right into it. So Lisa just gave us a little bit of information about both of your backgrounds. I was hoping you could briefly summarize some of the things you're working on now to sort of your research specialties. Oh, I gotcha. You got a little point.
Oh, there we go. Just a question. Good morning.
Good morning.
And I'm really honored to be here. And as Lisa mentioned earlier, the SC250 Commission has supported a tremendous number of programs to bring a full or comprehensive assessment of South Carolina Revolutionary War experiences. And one of the things they asked me to do was to look at diversity in this time frame. And in particular, to see what were the role of African Americans during the American Revolution. Well, I think I spent most of my life studying wars and heroic men and big events. So I decided I would look at the corporate side of the Revolutionary War, and in particular to see what was it like for African Americans who were enslaved, who may have been influenced by the war in a very positive way. So I came up with this topic, which I'm thinking about show right now. Excuse me if I get off track a little bit, so look at this and look at that at the same time. So I did a study called The Impact of the American Revolution on Slave Manumission in South Carolina between 1760 and 1800. It's an underworked topic. So I decided that maybe we should see if in fact the American Revolution had any impact on the number of African Americans who were in fact free, who received their freedom, because South Carolina, like other Americans of the time, were impacted by the Enlightenment ideologies of natural rights of man, pursuing happiness, liberty, the equality of man, individual freedom, etc., etc. These are very long concepts and rather abstract, I think. But South Carolinians were affected by that. And so I decided to research this to see if that had any significant impact on the number of manumissions that the state received on this time frame. In the period roughly between 1760 and 1800. But I started studying 1688 because that's the first identifiable day in which we saw anti-slavery in America. This 1688 day is when the Pennsylvania Quakers issued their revolution against slavery. But then, as I went through that period of leading up to 1760, I discovered that there are dozens of other examples of people who spoke out against slavery, even though we typically think that the abolitionists / anti-slavery movement is a 19th century phenomenon. In fact, it is a 17th century phenomenon, and it blows up in the 18th century. And I tell my students all the time that it was not the Civil War that spelled the death of slavery, it was the American Revolution that called spelled the death of slavery. It set in motion a series of events that for the next 87 years would eventually lead to the Civil War that would lead to the United States Proclamation. So I decided to look at this time frame, and I discovered that while free and enslaved person was not a new phenomenon prior to 1760, it did accelerate. So I want you to see a little bit of data. I'm sorry if it's too wordy. I want you to look at the numbers here. When I lived in the period between 1760 and 1775, I had reported 183 manumissions. Now during this time frame, I probably looked at about 2,000 wheels. But in that number, I discovered that 1,181 of them actually have manumission statements in them. There are more than that number than just all I looked at. During the war itself, 156 African Americans were manumitted. But after the revolution, look how the number goes up. So there must be a reason for this. And so I started looking at the numbers, looking at the yearly averages. This is the source statistics are not hard out there. But you can see that the numbers are getting larger as we get into the Revolutionary era and then we get younger time. This is the period after the Revolutionary War. So I looked at each one of these wheels and discovered that some things going on. Some of these people are being freed immediately, some are being freed in their wheels, but almost all of them are getting their freedom and eventually getting them based on what the executive carried out the wishes of the person who was in fact handling their estates. This is the profile of a person, and you can see that a large number of them were mixed race. So that suggests a certain level of relationship between the manumitted and the manumitter that we saw at that time frame. And then you can also see the proportion of men and women in this particular day. And all this data, of course, will be published by the American Sestercentennial Commission. I also looked at the manumitter. This is a quick profile of who they were, and you can see that the larger categories of planners, but merchants also are very prominent in this display, along with professional people. And of course, there's a large number of people we don't know who they are, but they don't tell you what they did for a living. These are percentages. More information in time frame. This time frame before the revolution, this is during the revolution, and this is after the revolution war. So you can see that planners represent a significant increase in terms of what we're doing. So I decided to look at some of these, and here are a couple of them that I just pointed out. This is Joseph H., who freed 40 Negro slaves, and this is an actual language from his will. So you see where Negro invested in terminology that was prevalent on that time. He said, I give the priest a content of 4 Negroes or slaves, serve the name, and I always give the name, and sometimes the description of them, how they look physically, the coloration, and so forth. And they use words like freedom and liberty from all service. This is an enlightening language, freedom, liberty. It shows up a lot. Here is another one by John the Hope, and he used free of the law of God, nature, humanity, intended she should be. Enlightenment thinking, and this is the prevalent ideology of time frame. Here's Thomas Wadsworth, who freed a tremendously large number of enslaved people. And you can see he used words like the common dictator of humanity, the common parent of the universe. This is all enlightenment ideology and wording that we see in a lot of the literature that's outside of this particular discussion. So we kind of concluded from that there is some impact of the American Revolution on the way South Carolinians and all these South Carolinians thought about institutional slavery. Here is Erasmus Gill, who, and his will said, fully persuaded that freedom is the natural right of all men, natural right. You can't get one right than the natural right. Men agree to the Bill of Rights Declaration on which I can see our present and the Constitution is established. So he's quickly referencing the Declaration of Independence and things going on in the Revolutionary era. And there are lots of this information we found in wheels, newspapers. When I started studying, I would tell my boy for, but when I started this study, I spent a lot of time right here at Charleston Library Society Library looking at the old newspapers on the time frame, and they were just chock with information about this type of things. But you also find this in our state legislative papers from that girl, and also the Charleston County Courthouse and the Department of Archive and History wheels, and you just have to be patient and look at them. There are some public sources you may find also. So what we do know is that the American Revolution had a tremendous impact on the way South Carolina, not just Northern as well, South Carolina called out institutional slavery. Now, it did not mean the slavery went away. It simply meant that there were some people who moved by the rhetoric of the Enlightenment era and felt that it was the right thing to do to free their enslaved people, and they did this in significantly larger numbers after the revolution than they did before the revolution. I have right there on the table 3 wheels for people who actually were members of the Charleston Library Society on this time frame. The governor, wife, Hannah Bull, Judith Ragg, who was the wife of John Ragg, and Amber Resnick, who was the wife of a member named Richard Resnick. But there's some others, including Henry Lawrence, who were members of the society, who are also free. So if you want to see their actual wheels, you can find them online in the Department of Archive and History, a digital file, you can find them there. But I brought 3 so you can physically see what's there. You can see the language that they're using, and they're justified in freeing their enslaved people. That's not a big benefit of the project. We actually got a paper set, about a 200-page paper, I guess, and it's going to be published on the Sestercentennial website.
And I'm Paul Wood, and I have a very different background from Lincoln. I was in ministry even before I finished high school, but formally left ministry 7 years ago, and then took on the Rev War in South Carolina, as I like to call it. You have to learn that expression. You have to call it that. Rev War. Isn't that easier to say than the revelation, the revolutionary war?
A lot of consonants, a lot of syllables.
Yes, there we go. So we cut those out. So I took that on as a hobby, and the first thing I did was to do research on a heroine of the American Revolution named Dicey Langston Springfield, married in Springfield. And there were a lot of questions on the part of very sharp people who wondered if any of these stories were valid and truthful. They sounded a little bit extreme. How could anyone really do that? Well, she was a young woman. Anyway, Dicey Langston Springfield, at the age of 15, did several heroic things in Lawrence County, South Carolina, what was then called the 96th District, and it was fascinating just to learn what I could about her. There were no primary sources. I was going to say that later in response to the question. Okay, we'll circle back to that. But then I took on a different challenge, and that was to research a very different sort of human being. What South Carolinian murdered more people than any other South Carolinian in the history of this state? His name was William Cunningham. And he murdered well over 40, probably more than 70 human beings in a 6-week period. In a 6-week period at the end of 1781. So he's called Bloody Bill, and I'm finishing up the first biography of Bloody Bill. I've not had to use the resources of the Charleston Library Society, one reason being that I didn't know about the resources.
I love it.
See what a newbie I am to this kind of thing? But I'm very impressed with what you all do. And I'll stop for now and let you move.
Fair enough. That's a very good transition, actually, to our next topic. I was going to ask, I know you've both had an opportunity to look at our digitized collection of Revolutionary War materials, Rev War materials. And I was just wondering if you could tell us about your research process, both in-person archives and more specifically with these new uploaded digital archives that are sort of trending more in our lives.
Okay. Well, Larry seems to be pointing to me first, and that's fine. This book is certainly not my book. This book is by Dr. Bob Andrew of Clemson, The Life and Times of General Andrew Pickens, Revolutionary War hero, American founder. Well, he spent, I can see by looking at the back of the book, that Rod Andrew, whom I've never met before, spent a fair amount of time right here because he was finding original or primary source material, letters written by Pickens to others and vice versa, that are located here. That impresses me very much. Also, the Sestercentennial Commission, or SC250, there we go, there's a better abbreviation, right? SC250. Now, if you really want to learn how to pronounce Sestercentennial, we'll have a little lesson on that afterwards. But all it means is 250th anniversary. They are paying for the papers of Francis Marion to be transcribed. Have you ever found a letter that's more than 200 years old, and you're looking at it and how they wrote in those days, and you get F's and S's confused and all those other letters? I greatly admire people who can read these old documents like Larry. So that work, or at least part of it, for the Francis Marion papers is being done here.
Yeah, we have a number of Francis Marion that are within this collection that are available online right now. We do also try to have everything transcribed because of that reason. They're hard to read. A lot of college students are surprisingly good at it. You wouldn't think so, but I think Erin was the name of the young woman who did a lot of our Andrew Pickens letters, and she was great at it.
Well, those college days are well behind me. Yeah. So another example of the value of this kind of thing is Dennis Conrad, the editor of the Papers of Nathaniel Greene, General Nathaniel Greene. It's 13 volumes, I think. Thousands of pages of his letters going back to the beginning of his life, I think. But mainly, of course, it's the Rev War that interests us. And all that he did here in South Carolina when he arrived in Charlotte, North Carolina in December of 1780. boy, did we need someone to lead continental troops, because we lost an entire army right here in Charleston when the largest surrender of the war took place, and General Benjamin Lincoln had to yield up his whole army to the British who had just taken Charleston. Then, I hate to even call his name, General Gates, Horatio Gates, brings down another army, and he doesn't even get to Camden. He's on his way to Charleston to free Charleston, but no, outside of Camden, he is clobbered by Cornwallis. So it was Greene who came down as the third attempt to take Charleston. It took a long time, but once we recovered Charleston, then we had the state back. So I admire people like Dennis Conrad and those who worked with him to transcribe the papers of Nathaniel Greene. I could go on, but I'll stop with that.
Thank you. I'm actually still getting through the diary, the travel diary. When I started, it's part of the digital collection here. When I started reading this, I sort of got caught up in the ordeal of the lawyer's family that was trying to get safe passage to the West Indies. But then they kept referencing the big old pilots who were heading them. Which I found interesting because we know that many of the people who navigated the river from the Strait to South Carolina, African American, the boat swingsmen, who did that kind of thing, and they depended heavily on him and his expertise to get them safe passage out of Charleston. And I can come in, and this is part of it. I think you just sent that out for the store.
Yeah, the Louisa Wells Avening manuscript, and it's getting conserved.
There's a lot of information in there, and even though the primary text is focusing on the family, and they talk about the people that they're encountering, they're a certain level of dependency. And one of the things that they said that recently there seems to be this sympathy for the enslaved people who are here. And she said she went over half to the poor fellow who was helping us, because they're just trying to get safe passage out of here, and he's helping them, but they also know he's not going with them, he's being used for that. So I look for stuff like that because they didn't write it, and so I have to give a voice to them to see what other people say about me, and we found quite a bit of that. Now going through the rest of the myriad papers, if you also digitize, and the military dispatches, that required a lot of reading because they're talking about strategies, they're talking about troop strength, and so when I look at those kind of things, I'm looking to see if there are any African American missing in number, and there are. So it gives me an opportunity to see those kind of things. Then I subsequently follow up to see what happened to those people after the war, because quite a few of them are free after the war as a payment for the service. So that's your digital value that I'm careful with the cost of the grant that you have. But just in the newspapers that you have here from the time frame, they're just extremely rich in local news, in the presentness of the grand jury that is preoccupied with the African American community in this time frame. But you pick up a lot of other interesting things. They were pretty much opposed to some of the corporate things going on like the theater. They thought the theater was corrupting the youth. And so they're a critique. This is not I'm being correct. Yeah, and you have that here in your newspaper collection, and you can read those kind of things. The grand representative, which were published on a regular basis, usually anywhere from 10 to 15 of them speak to every possible societal problem from the streets not being taken care of, to waterways not being cleared, to the local sheriff not enforcing the law, or the local sheriff being in complicity with the local tavern, doing this little booze operation at that terminology. So the sources here are just tremendous, and so I kind of live in the 18th century. So when I read the newspaper, it's like reading the paper daily, and you get a chance to see what people are thinking, and that is why I find that collection extremely valuable. And I know that all of these people are not digitized, but there's some that are, and they're very valuable.
Yeah, we've got things in the work. We're working on things in the newspapers right now. I won't divulge too much. But yeah, kind of in that same vein, a big part of this project was sort of trying to highlight underrepresented voices in Revolutionary War history. And we've touched on it a little bit, but how do you sort of bring out these voices for people who often didn't leave written records?
Well, the wills have been tremendously beneficial in that regard because in the wills, the person who's doing the main mission typically will tell you things about the age of that person, the kind of work they did, how long they served. But interestingly, they also, quite a few of them would say, if I'm freeing this particular person, I'm going to give them an English stipend or X number of pounds, or I will give them some land in certain places. Or they might direct their executive to build up a house. There's very interesting will in which the main builder tells his executive to build a house with a specific number of bedrooms, a specific number of chimneys to furnish a certain furniture and give that person a piece of land nearby for them to raise a garden. And so that's a real person who does not appear in any records before they're free. But then you look at in the 1800 census and you look at that person, you see that person is there. So now this person may have a family. They may even, some of them may actually slave on themselves, actually, when I think about it. So those people now have to look at the tax records and see what their net worth, what kind of things going on. So once I find them in the wills and find them free, I follow up to see, do they live? And if they live, what happens to them? So we see this free black population in Charleston. There's only about 2,000 in 1790. We can see it growing up to almost 10,000 by the time we get to the Civil War. So this becomes a way to attract those people lives. And then you see them in public schools, you see them traveling, you see them establishing churches, and they do something, there are some restrictions on them. So this gives an opportunity to sort of follow them along, and this starts in the Revolutionary period, because that's when the free Negro population actually birthed in a major way, and then we can see it grow over the next 60 years.
Good.
As for me, let me go back to the young woman, Dicey Langston Springfield, age 15. She did some amazing things to help patriot militiamen escape the wrath of loyalist militiamen. Being up in the 96th district, she was in a part of South Carolina where the percentage of loyalists and the percentage of patriots was just about the same. Not everyone wanted independence. Not everyone wanted to leave our connection with Great Britain, and that may be very hard for us in the modern day to comprehend. But a lot of people, for example, there were people who had recently immigrated to South Carolina and received royal land grants whose origins were in Germany. So many of these German settlers settled in the Saxe-Gotha community. Think about the word Saxe-Gotha, which is below Columbia. And then many more settled in what is commonly called nowadays the Dutch Fork. Well, that was a, dare I say a word, bastardization of, that's not a bad word, is it? Okay, not a bad word. Deutsch, they were hearing Deutsch and they thought they're Dutch. Okay, so these people are Dutch or whatever. So it's part of South Carolina. It's where the Broad River and the Saluda River come together and you stretch out. They're like that. And Columbia is where they come together. These people had recently received their land from the king. They were just settling into South Carolina, and the king was German. George I, George II, neither of them even learned to speak English. George III did learn to speak English, but these German settlers knew not the connection. So you've got a lot of folks in that upper part of South Carolina, what you and I now call the upstate, whose loyalty is really with the king, and they don't see any point in this colony called South Carolina becoming independent. So Dicey and her parents were patriots, and her brothers, who were of age, were out fighting as militiamen. They couldn't go home. They were in danger if they went home. Dicey did some things to save the brothers and to save her father and her younger siblings who were still at home. We don't know what role the mother could have played in any of this. So let me say that being a woman, and notice 15 years old, if you're 15, you're a woman in that culture, okay? She got married the very next year. Okay, so she's a woman, she's helping the patriot cause, but she was never an enlisted soldier, was she? So her name never appears in these pension records that we have. The DAR recognizes her. So there are many proud women who look back to Dicey as their great-great-great-great-grandmother, etc. And they have membership in the Daughters of the American Revolution. And it was not a man they connect to. It was a 15-year-old who was a woman whom they connected to. So we didn't have any source records for Dicey for a long time. It was all within the family and these oral stories until the editor of the Greenville paper, which was called the Greenville Mountaineer, interviewed a member of the family sometime after Dicey's death and learned about Dicey and what she had done. And now I really have to shorten down what I'm saying. But the editor passed the stories along to Elizabeth Elliott. And Elizabeth Elliott, a New Yorker, became the first person to write a book summarizing the stories of what women did during the American Revolution. The book is entitled simply The Women of the American Revolution. So the Dicey stories first show up there, and I've analyzed them since. Why don't I stop with that?
I just want to do a footnote on what you said. The German influence is very obvious when you look at the names in the Lexington area, in the Orangeburg area. It's clear you can see the German-based names in the area. That's where a lot of Germans we call them Dutch because they're Germans. And so you can see the influence there as well. Elevated women, especially during Operation Charleston. It was one of the women that really saved the city. They were, of course, the men were all suspect. You were lawyers, and that was okay, or they were patriots and revolutionary, and that was not okay. So the women who worked, who kept things going, it was wonderfully impacted by the British occupation in Charleston in a very harsh way. The patriot women, I should say, because the loyal women received benefits from being loyal to the king, and so that was an issue. There's a part of works in this subject. I still like Jennifer great people when King book, and when she talks about this conflict that we have among the Native Americans, the lawyers, and African Americans.
And I go back and repronounce his name because Jim's last name is so hard.
If you please do.
He's Dr. Jim Piketch. Now, if I try to spell it for you, you'll get all mixed up. P-I-E-C-U-C-A. Anyway, so his book is Three Peoples, One King. It ties right in with what you
So I think that gives you some perspective of diverse religion in the Revolutionary War era. The Sestercentennial Commission is going to come out with a couple of panels on this subject too. And I think, I don't want to get ahead of it either, but it put a lot of focus on underrepresented groups in the Revolutionary era. And I think you'll be pleased to see it when it comes out.
Great. Yeah, we've basically touched on this a lot, especially with our friend Dicey. But when you think about sort of military history and the Revolutionary War in particular, you think of it as being fought by white men in uniform, all lined up in a row. And we're touching on women and people of color, enslaved people, free people. How did they interact with the conflict itself in the military?
And that, Larry knows, I don't have a whole lot to say on this subject. So I'm turning it all over to Larry.
Yeah, right. You asked me how did these diverse groups impact the Revolutionary War? Well, the Intercontinental Force was probably not, the Intercontinental Army was probably not much more than 25,000 troops. And the 13 colonies, probably 25,000 troops. We now know that probably about 5,000 of those troops were African Americans. We also know that if you just think about combatants, the number would be significantly smaller. Because combatants, they're the soldiers. And the United States, can't say United States, but they are official United States after 1776, although they didn't make that at that time. The official policy was to use African American soldiers initially. And then the very next year, 1777, the official policy was not to use them. And then later on that year, the policy was shifted again to allow them to enlist primarily the northern states. Southern states like South Carolina and Georgia did not want any black troops for fear, for one thing, South Carolina had a significantly large Euro-black population and they were concerned about security. And Georgia, of course, was banned having slaves until 1750, so they had a much smaller black population anyway. So there was that concern about using them as soldiers. However, they served the cause on both sides based on interests. The African American soldier typically would fight for the side that promised them freedom. And therefore, quite a few of them did fight for the British. And quite a few of them left with the British. Somewhere between 5 and 10,000, I not but I know it's something like that. But they served as aid camps, they served as scouts, they served as guides, they served as labor who built invention and fortification for the either side that they were fighting on. South Carolina actually used enslaved people as boundaries to induce white men to join the military, to join the South Carolina fighting forces. So they were cooks. So they're ever present in these battles in varied roles, though not necessarily as combatants, but as supporters. And so in that mindset, permeated the American military thinking up until World War II. That even though I know that Greece hired during the Civil War, officers did fight all the time, but for the most part, they were used as support role in so-called quartermaster units. But they're there. And when men are gone to war, and there are enslaved people on plantation, they take on larger roles there as well. So we saw that in some of the outlying plantations, and even some of the urban area, the African Americans who were left behind to work with the women who were left behind, took on greater roles.
So maybe a last question before we throw it to the audience. So we have a mix of items in this collection that we digitize. We have letters related to George Washington. We have a lovely doodle we love to show off from Alexander Hamilton. But we also have a lot of things from everyday people. We have diaries. We have a letter from someone selling a horse. We have items like that sort of variety of types of people producing these documents. So I was just wondering what your approach to studying the Revolutionary War is in terms of scope of like famous figures versus sort of everyday people.
I'll go first on this one. I've mentioned William Cunningham to you already, another Lawrence County, South Carolina person, all right? I'm not from Lawrence County, I'm from Camden. I'm blessed to be able to live in Camden again now, not hometown. But Lawrence County was just a hotbed of conflict between loyalists and patriots. And the Cunninghams were loyalists. They made it clear from the beginning, 1775, a council of safety formed here in Charleston that was the initial patriot government of South Carolina. It was just developing. Not much of a government, but it had to start somewhere. You'd kicked out the royal governor, and he was on a ship out in harbor, okay? He couldn't have much influence here in South Carolina anymore. So the Cunninghams spoke out against independence from Great Britain, and they had a distant relative named William, who initially was a patriot. But William, after a couple of years, decided, hey, I'm going to go with my prominent cousins. I'll just call them cousins, who were Robert Cunningham and Patrick Cunningham. When the British came in 1780, Robert became the top militia general in this state, even though he had no military training. His brother Patrick became second level to Robert. When the war was over and Great Britain was ready to compensate the loyalists who had done so much for them, even though it was a losing cause, they were ready to compensate these people. They gave more money and more land to Robert Cunningham than anybody else. And he had moved to the Bahamas, and I've been to his grave site in Nassau, in the Bahamas.
Must have been a hardship going on that trip, having to do research in NASA.
Oh, yeah. That was a rough day. Thanks, I think, for saying that. But I did end up in Nassau doing some research. But this other one is William. And William is much younger. He's angry. He's a very good leader of soldiers. And I've been able to look at all of this. He was a very good soldier, rises to the rank of a major. So he's got a lot of men serving under him. But the time has come to retaliate. So he leads 300 men out of Charleston on very good horses, and they've got lots of ammunition, and I think every last one of them has a saber or sword. Their first mission is to go wherever they can to steal cattle. Why are the cattle needed? Because you've got all the hungry people here in Charleston. They couldn't get in enough food from ships coming in from Great Britain or Jamaica, so the British Army had to send out foraging parties within, let's say, a 20-mile radius of right where we are, the peninsula, but that still wasn't enough. So Cunningham and others were sent out to steal cattle, and they made their way all the way to Saluda County. Well, you have to look at a map if you don't know South Carolina yet, but that's a long way. So they steal the cattle. The Patriots catch up with them. These are the owners of the cattle. They want their cows back, obviously. And Cunningham himself was not there yet. He'd gone a different route. Well, without firing shots or anything, they turned the cattle back over. So the Patriots start driving the cattle back to their own farms. And this is 20 miles or so. They don't get 20 miles before the sun sets. They don't get 20 miles before William Cunningham catches up with them. And at dawn the next morning, using their sabers, they kill every one of those Patriots. So their family members the next morning are finding body parts and putting them into a mass grave. And of course, they took the cattle to Charleston.
I was going to ask about the cows.
Yeah, the cows were fine until they got to Charleston. And then they became hamburger. Okay. But this is, then there was a massacre 2 days later, and this event called Bloody Scout lasted 6 weeks. It started in early November. They were all back before New Year's Day, so about 6 weeks. And including the third massacre, which Cunningham was not actually involved in, you're looking at 70 deaths of people who had been disarmed and then shot. You come to the door, you see who's at the door, they shoot you before there's even any conversation. That's the kind of murdering that was going on during Bloody Scout. I learned about a lot of that, some of that anyway, by reading the papers of Nathaniel Greene, because these Patriot officers, both who are true officers of the Continental Army, and the Patriot militia officers such as Andrew Pickens and Francis Marion and Thomas Sumter, they're now all trying to catch up with Cunningham and maybe carry out some more justice. They all figured he should be hung or shot, right? Hanged. Sorry, that's what I'm there. Hanged. No, he got away. He died in the Bahamas. So, that's
well, and my story is not quite that far off. I thrive in minority services. Data, especially, because data is, theoretically, data would mean not to be shared. They're not meant to be public documents. And so there's a tendency sometimes for diaries to be more honest and sincere what they're saying, because there'll be no public consequences for them saying it. So I like diaries. And typically diaries give us a lot of information about how people live. We talk about other people in particular. So diaries are very important. And if you forget something, I'm a supporter of diaries. I also like newspapers. Newspapers, from this time frame, can be considered primary sources, even though they may necessarily be secondary accounts because somebody has a role in them. But newspapers would typically give us a feel for what people did in certain time frames and communities, how they viewed each other. There's other complaints too. But they also tell you about how what people they're eating, what kind of clothes they're wearing, where they're buying from, who they're trading with. I mean, to me, your collection of newspaper is just invaluable because just to read them, you really get turned into a daily consumer of what's in those newspapers. So I primarily view especially beneficial when I'm looking for things. When it comes to military workers, especially creating them, especially because in the world we today, it's easy to just get a phone call or text and it goes away. But then it was written down. There were this generals and staff people who worked with the officers typically sat down and wrote out troop strength, talked about casualties, talked about supplies, and they give you all this information, and so you get a feel for what's there. And people like, for instance, Marion, well, all of that, they were very meticulous note takers, and so they had to write this down, but this information had to be shared with someone in order to be beneficial. So consequently, you get to see you actually down on the ground with these people. And so when I'm reading the bill, I may not necessarily be interested in the number of people who got killed in a particular battle, but I would be interested in their description of the soldier. Versus the one they say, my name goes Sarah John, or the wife or one of my soldiers brought this to camp to take care of a wounded husband. So you get to see, so if I see that a woman comes to camp to take care of her husband who's in the militia, who's in the military, then that woman has just been given some importance. Otherwise, she's just not something you just gloss over. So I can extrapolate from that women sometimes visit their husband in camp. Especially when they could, and the conditions allow, to service them. Well, I mean, and that'd be to take a look at the home, to feed them, and this happens more often than we talk about. Historically, when we talk about these kind of things, we just talk about how many people fought, how many people got killed, who were in battle, and we don't see these undercarriages. And so I like the primary sources, military dispatches, public records, like the paper press and everything. They give us an opportunity to look at other things. I want to make a comment about architecture too, in terms of influence. You only need to drive into the Mexican backcountry to see the impact of German architecture there. You can see the impact of German architecture in the Australia area, because there's a heavy German influence there. And so we know that the people who move in those areas, that they also brought their way of doing things there, the way they form. The people there were not, especially in the next area, were not big slave owners. So people lived in small farms. And so they were somewhat hostile to slavery for a long time. And so these are the kind of things you pick up when you get into primary sources, you get a local newspaper, you get private papers, and you kind of, you get that from examining primary documents, and I know you have those kind of things here.
We do, and we're very proud of them. And this has been a great talk, and I think we're ready to see if the audience has any interesting questions to add. And Gabriel has some instructions on microphones.
I do. We have microphones, so please raise your hands. We'll come to you, see one there, and when you do, speak to the microphone. Thank you.
Thank you. That was really excellent. It's always fun to hear about the unknown, the people in our history here in Charleston and all sorts. So I'm just curious, for both of you, in your research, how many rabbit holes have you opened up and not explored yet? And I can't imagine that in doing the research that you don't see a reference to something and say, oh, I really need to go look at that. And do you set it aside? Do you talk to yourself and say, no, I can't do that? What do you do?
This is probably the greatest application I have in on this. Your purpose is here. When you come across something that's so interesting, you go over and and that's what we do. And that we open up to take away from your entire purpose and get your job done. That happened to me on occasion. But here's something that happened to me twice. When I was working on slave code in the colonial period, I came across a grand jury representatives. And it just kept appearing in the newspapers. And I started connecting with them, even though they had very little to do with my primary purpose, but they were just interested. And so I kept putting them aside, and eventually I wound up like $200 or $300 over a period of roughly 1720 to 1800. And so, so I put that in a box, and I said, one day I'm going to go back and do these. I did, I put them in a catalog and I published them. It was just that there was a stuff I had anything to do. In fact, my doctoral chairperson is sitting and asking me to leave that alone because it was distracting. He did. Once I published it, something together. The other thing with the slavery and issue document I'm working on now, this is a topic that I just wrote it down. It became clear to me that freedom isn't free unless it doesn't document what the nature of that freedom is. So I'm seeing all these manuscript enslaved people, and that's the end of the story as far as the will is concerned. So I want to see what was it like after freedom. And so I started looking at petitions that were that these formerly enslaved people were presented to the South Carolina General Assembly, asking for relief from certain tax burdens, asking for ownership of property, because they were arguing, and there was a petition, there was a 1788 petition of these free Negroes who were presented to the South Carolina General Assembly. They said, listen, we have this burden that free citizens have, but we don't have the rights that free citizens have. And so the petition, of course, they were rejected. But it gave me an idea that maybe we need to look at life after freedom. So now I'm trying to figure out how can I get all these other things I can be on and come back and see what the nature of their existence. Though free, it's kind of like, in fact, I've already started in college to the word, neither slave nor free. The free African American in post-revolution South Carolina.
And I just add, it can be very hard to stay focused. You use rabbits and rabbit holes. My wife and I would like to use rabbits in a different way. Uh-oh, there he goes down a rabbit trail. Thank you.
Hi, thank you again. Wonderful. Just hi, thank you. I have another general research question. I found myself in many ancestry rabbit holes and end up, counties away and cousins away. But I found newspapers that publish things such as Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so visited their cousins in this county and stayed for 2 weeks and then traveled, by train or however. I've seen that multiple times, probably 100 years ago. Were details such as that seen in newspapers back during this time, or?
Oh, that would be travel accounts?
Yes. Oh, that's a much more succinct way to say that.
There are quite a few travel accounts, of course. Now, there are variations of it. There are people constantly coming from Europe who are traveling in the Carolinas, America, and they're documenting what they see. I'm trying to think of the person who talked about and it's not very clear what he said about the women of the Vatican, or the unchurched nature of people in the Vatican. And he's a traveler,
That Anglican priest.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't think of it. But
one of us will think of
it.
it.
Yeah, it's something to mention. But it's such a well-known guy. I feel very But you get those kind of accounts as well, and that's going to continue right up to the Civil War and beyond. Utopia will come next century, so this is not uncommon for people to come and to document what they see. Now they did not have Charles Wood. They think it's something about it. Most of the accounts are not very flattering of the people they see, because especially if you come from England and you tend to see the America is less cultured than you are, so you find that to be the case. But religious people were concerned about the fact that the large portion of that were unchurched, and that became another issue for some. But you also find people talking about the dress, the harsh conditions that people live in, and these things are written down in their travel, in their diary, in their account books, and so it gives us a tremendous amount of insight into that. So yeah, that's not uncommon to find those kinds of accounts. I tell you, if you want to see, if you have time to do it, go to the National Humanities Center Toolbox Library. That must long word, but the National Humanities Center Toolbox Library, and then click on the box that puts you in the United States history from 1607 to 1776, and then look at the primary sources there, and you see a lot of travels accounts there, and either primary, unedited, and you'll get to read the actual document. And there are thousands of these documents in the file, but you can just center on what you want to see right there. You see a lot of stuff like that.
No, that's it.
Thank you so much for your great comments and great work in this area. And thinking about telling revolutionary war stories that have often been told, I'm wondering if you all know of anyone doing any work on LGBTQ in the American Revolution in South Carolina. There's been more of that on the national scale, so I didn't know if World War 250 was going to be encouraging any of that work. If you know of anyone doing that, if you do, I'm letting more questions, like ways to get those stories as well.
I'm not aware of that. I'm aware of the work of the commission was given to the commission by the state legislature, and I don't know of that population being targeted.
Right. I think it'd be very unlikely to have found a lot of that particular setting, because it was a non-discussed set. That does not mean that was not the case in some instances, just we don't have the documentation for it, and I'm personally not familiar with it. It's an intriguing question, and maybe one that we need to look into.
Yeah, I think SC 250 is just sort of encouraging different institutions to do that kind of research. I don't personally specifically know, like, who is focusing on LGBTQ. I know Harlan Green has written a history of Charleston that focuses on that history. I think it touches on this time period a little bit, but it's not specific to the Revolutionary War, but I'm sure someone that's out there is looking into it.
I'm sorry if I missed it, but what year was Cunningham going on his rampage?
The end of 1781. In other words, he started out after the Battle of Utah Springs, after the surrender of Yorktown. It's really looking like the British are going to lose, okay? But he finds a window of time when he is properly horsed, 300 other men, lots of good ammunition, lots of sharp swords, okay? And off they go, and their main mission is to get cattle. But these are angry men who have been forced out of their homes by the Patriot government, and they know that they can't go back home, ever. So when all is said and done, many of them moved to East Florida, which was a British colony at the time the war ended. They go to Nova Scotia and the maritime provinces, Jamaica. Jamaica was pretty crowded, and really you just needed to be a planter and have a lot of enslaved people working for you. Even dream of that. And by the way, East Florida, as soon as several thousand South Carolinians settled in East Florida, there are these people like Benjamin Franklin in Paris, France, deciding on the Treaty of Paris. England wants to keep Gibraltar. Spain wants Florida back. So East Florida becomes Spanish territory, and all of these British citizens now have to leave Spain. So they just left South Carolina. Now they've got to pack up again and move somewhere else. A fair number moved to the Bahamas, but that was when they thought that the soil would be pretty good for cotton. No, the soil in the Bahamas is really not soil at all.
And worth noting that the many lawyers who left South Carolina were slave owners. They took several thousand slave people with them. And those who fought for the British were promised freedom. But almost all of them were re-enslaved in the West Indies. So that was a promise made that was not kept by the British government.
Yeah.
And so we saw that happen. We also went to Barbados and Bermuda, and the British islands, they populated that area. And some of them actually like it itself.
Now I've seen several hands. Maybe have it from skydive.
Microphone over here.
Oh, she's ready.
Are the papers of memory indexed?
Indexed? What do you mean indexed?
By name?
Well, we have, the Nathaniel Green papers that we have are transcribed, so if you go on our digital collections website, you can search them, and if the name you're looking for is in there, it'll show up in the search results. I don't know if we have, I don't know if the 13 volume thing.
Or you buy the whole 13 volumes, that's a lot of money. But each volume is well indexed.
We don't have 13 volumes, but we have some Nathaniel Green papers. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time. This has been wonderful. One question for you and one for him, very briefly. From a linguistic point of view, many missions, which is not my first language, I've always heard of inspiration. And I'm curious to know, I didn't really understand many missions, where it came from.
Mission is pretty much the legal term, which means you set someone free. Someone wants to say you grant them freedom. Now, mission is in the will, that's simply say someone who desire that happen. It says execute. So therefore, the person who made for whatever is to prove. And typically, you got something called a certificate of freedom. A certificate of freedom is a legal document, a sign-off, witness, and recorded in the courthouse. So that a question arises whether you in fact are free, you can have someone go to the courthouse, find that document, and say, oh yeah, and it's very descriptive too, by the way, because it not only tells you you're free, but it approximates your age. It tells you what your physical characteristics are, like 4 feet 5, scarred, left shoe, left-handed, your complexion. And if I never say where you were born, so it's very descriptive, so that when someone think about it, it's like when someone look at you and look at the certificate of freedom, it should match. And so when you mandate it, you're set free, but proof has to be validated, and the certificate of freedom does that.
So is it a legal word?
So manumission is a legal word.
Okay,
Yes,
thank you.
it's a legal process.
I'll skip the second question. People want to ask questions. Thank you.
Last fall, my wife and I visited the site of the Clouds Creek massacre.
Yes.
My wife's great-great-great-great-grandfather, Captain James Butler, and his son were killed there.
How about
I understand it was by Cunningham.
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit of the background of that massacre?
Well, the father and the son, the Butlers, were killed, like I just said, at Clouds Creek. The massacre I described in too much detail for you a few minutes ago is the Clouds Creek massacre, followed 2 days later by the Hayes Station massacre. But you're a Butler.
She's a Butler.
That is amazing. And you see, these people know this. I don't know where you live, man, but people in the upstate of South Carolina who know that they had relatives who were killed by Bloody Bill, they remember that. They, this is passed on generation to generation. Where do you live, if I may ask?
What's your address?
My address is, we live in Somerville now, but my family actually ended up in Kentucky.
Yes. Yeah, see, they're spread all over the place. A lot of deaths, but a lot of survivors. Thank you.
I just have a question, and thank you for the total discussion. I'm South African, and I find it extremely interesting listening to this discussion right now. Because I wondered if any of the slaves that did exist went back to Africa.
I'm sorry.
Is there any documentation that the slaves that were freed went back to Africa?
Well, we just talked about the
Yeah, well, actually, in Africa, this is the 18th century, of course. By the time we get to the end of the American Revolution, the British have already established a free legal colony in Sierra Leone. And so Sierra Leone was already there. And so, because Britain started this process of the abolition of slavery before the Americans did. But in the early part of the 19th century, 1820-ish time frame, the president, James Monroe, the United States established a free Negro or repatriated colony of African Americans in what is known as Liberia. And in fact, the capital is known as Monrovia.
The capital is named after President.
Right? So many of these, enslaved people in the 19th century will wind up, some of them will wind up going back to Africa. In fact, there was a professor in Charleston named Jacob Jones who had a son who actually goes back there to teach. So we know that's the case. But in the time frame I'm focusing on here, the 1760s and 1800s, very few of these people are going back, although one or two of them do have some record of some of them going back. But for the most part, these have been mandated and allowed to stay here. But in the next century, because the problem of slavery began to pull the country apart, many people felt like the solution would be to repatriate the African Americans to Africa. So we don't see that recolonization movement in earnest until after 1820.
Oh, interesting. Because I remember when I was back home that I did meet people that had been here at any point in time.
Yeah, in one of my classes at USC, I had a young lady who was, her name was Barcon. She lived, she was from Liberia, but she was staying with some fourth or fifth generation family members who still live here. And so she had family on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. Back in the 1820s or 30s, her family, and some of them had been sent back to Africa, but some of them also stayed here. So she was able to connect herself, fill that void in between, and connect herself to a 20th century family. I just thought it was extraordinarily interesting. There are other people doing this as well.
It's happening quite a lot now.
Yeah, it happens much more frequently than absolutely way, because people figured it out.
Yes, because of the media that we now have, and on WhatsApp, you can see the communications that go on. Okay, thank you.
We have time for one more.
Thank you so very much for your presentations this morning and the discussions. My question comes in regards to the research side. With the British, are there primary sources that you've come across that would help understand better how they recruited from plantations the Africans and African Americans to come fight with the British?
Well, you go first.
I want to be sure.
Somehow or the other, the British announced to the people of South Carolina when they arrived in 1780, took Charleston, took Gold State a few weeks later. They announced that any enslaved person who wanted to join with them would earn his, I think usually his freedom by joining their forces. So some of them made their way to the coast and the sea islands south of here and joined the British Navy, for example. Or others became men who did the work that Larry was describing earlier. But how that was conveyed, you're asking about primary sources and how that was conveyed, I do not know.
Well, the British effort to recruit blacks early started in Virginia. And because that's where the war was an issue. It was up at home. It wasn't here. The war came south in 1780 again, in a major way. So the government of Virginia, Governor Dunstable, issued a proclamation. And in the proclamation went to African Americans. It's interesting because the majority of African Americans cannot read or write. But yet, it is that irregular case, but people understood certain things. And then his proclamation said that any black person, any African American, any enslaved person who would fight for the British upon conclusion of the war would be granted freedom. And a lot of them did. Out of Virginia, but that information filtered south and South Carolina as well. And so consequently, many African Americans who were on these in the urban area in particular received this kind of information, and they had a decision to make what they would fight for the Americans who may or may not be promising freedom, or the British who were promising freedom. even if the British not honored their word eventually, they didn't know that at the time. So the recruitment effort was primarily by word of mouth. That if you join the British forces, then you grant freedom to the conclusion of the war. And so it's the irony that the British and the American used the African American exactly the same way to benefit their military effort. And both sides sort of held a part of that promise and did not hold a part of that promise. So that's pretty much how it worked. Outside the remote plantations, further south in Beaufort, and outlying area around Charleston, that information just did not build out there well, but in the urban areas, you would get that information in Charleston, Camden, Georgetown, in Beaufort City, and not in the outlying area.
Thank you. Thank you, Rose, for coming.